when COVID began to rear its head in December 2019, January 2020, I was already at the World Health Organization. I was an advisor in the area of the WHO in Geneva and in Pan American Health in Washington had contracted me to set up a training program in bread and butter epidemiology about the issues around how do you conduct epidemic responses, how to write statistical reports, how to present it to the international community, just how to write basic bread and butter epidemiology in terms of orienting information and data in terms of person, place, time, who's at risk, why you're at risk, how to mitigate the risk, etc. So I developed this training program for low and middle income countries across the world. Then at around December 2019, WHO told me that, well, we have this thing emerging, rearing its head in China and Lombardy, Italy. And we really don't have an understanding of what it is. So we need WHO to pivot and to set up some sort of response to whatever they're talking about a bat coronavirus, and at that point WHO called it coronavirus. That was the name. It was not COVID. It was not COVID-19, whatever. So they changed my role from that project. In fact, the project had actually come to an end. It was actually successful. And they made me their pandemic advisor. So what the listener should understand is, originally, from around January of 2020, WHO's pandemic, this COVID response team was really me and my boss, the director. I wouldn't name his name here, but we reported directly to the Director General. And what they asked of me was, how could you take all of the information that we're beginning to emerge globally and try to put it into a way that we could understand and inform the decision making for WHO, hence the rest of the world. So really and truly in the beginning, it was myself and my boss. We were trying to orient what information we could in terms of if there are any treatments, how do we triage populations, and we began to inform the Director General, etc. At that point, I began to understand that at the WHO level, there was just pure chaos because they didn't really understand the situation. Nor any of us. I was concerned myself. Everybody was concerned. The way that WHO was messaging, which was that there was this elevated mortality rate, etc., of 3.4%. So at that point, persons in the Trump administration had reached out to me to say that, some of my speeches, some of what I was writing had reached the purview of the Oval Office. And, the President Trump and they had already struck up the task force, and that there was a lot of contention on a lot of issues, and that they wanted a voice like mine to come to Washington to provide some balance at Health and Human Services, to work with the Health and Human Services Secretary and the Assistant Secretary and inform them and the employees there. It was almost like an interface, not almost, it was an interface between Health and Human Services and the White House. So I almost had the kind of reporting that was straight line reporting to people like Azar and Caputo, but dotted line reported to the White House. And we would obviously be going through people like the Chief of Staff, etc. But we were informing the pandemic response that the United States was implementing. Now, the listener should also know that straight out of the gate, I stood against the lockdowns, stood against the overall pandemic response, and even the bringing of this, what we know as to be the COVID mRNA vaccine. So as I arrived, there was almost a war that began between myself, members of the task force, particularly Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. I had the good fortune of working meeting and working with Dr. Scott Atlas. His office was in the Eisenhower building in the White House. My office was at Health and Human Services. I knew of people like Peter Navarro. He was Dr. Navarro. He was also had an office in one of the wings of the White House. So there were 3 or 4 of us that the media was not really reporting, who were actually banging away on the inside. We were fighting actually against the task force, because the task force, and I mean, I am being as, remember, we have decided to come forward with this show to be very open, transparent, and explicit to the population. I'm just talking to you as it is, the way I see it and what has happened. I have a unique vantage point, maybe unique in America, because I was basically the only like evidence-based medicine scientist at HHS at that point. Most of HHS was closed and most of everyone was working remotely. But being at HHS in the policy division, it was unique to have somebody like me there. I was very honored and privileged to serve President Trump. I would do it again. But the point I'm making is that I was in a unique position because I was able to see all of the policy. I was able to operate as a scientist. I was able to work with all of the members of the task force because they worked at the HHS building. So I would deal with Redfield, Hahn, Gerard, the whole group of them, and have the opportunity to learn and to develop further. The bottom line is that with my background training and what was taking place in America in terms of COVID, I knocked heads, but bad heads, with a lot of the deep state. And the deep state is really the administrative state. Mm-hmm. It is real. They refer to themselves as the deep state, and they made decisions as I arrived there to not complete my hire, to not pay me, to do a lot of things. And a lot of the population don't know that for a large part of my stint in the Trump administration, I was not paid.
Okay, so let me just stop you there for a second. You talk about this term, deep state, and I know that that's something that I've seen thrown around a lot online, and conspiracy theorists have thrown that around, or people have been accused, if they've used that word, of being a conspiracy theorist. So I want to take that for a moment and just tell us how you define deep state. Who exactly is deep state?
Well, I mean the deep state is real, and the deep state are the career bureaucrats. These are the people who are in government 20, 25, 30 years. And whether in the State Department, whichever department, human resources, whatever, they regard the president as a transitional individual. So, for example, there was once President Trump had invited some of us at HHS to come to the hotel, the Trump Hotel in Washington, and to have a drink and to relax, because we were having a tough time in the media. And I was one of them that they invited. So there I am there, and I was having some good conversations with Dr. Atlas. He was there, Scott Atlas. So we just have, and there was this person from the State Department. So I met this individual and we were talking back and forth. And I'm standing there and I'm trying to understand. So I said, look, there's this term called the deep state. Can you define it for me from a State Department perspective? So again, I can't say his name, mm-hmm. because we operate, we don't want anyone recriminated. And this person actually was working in the State Department before President Trump arrived. So I would actually say he was more Democrat than Republican, but he was actually in the Trump Hotel, in the lobby with us in the restaurant. And he told me straight, he said, President Trump is visiting. So I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? He said, we run America. We own America. We run this thing. President Trump will be gone at the end of this election. And if he wins, he may be here for another 4. But he's just passing through.
So let me stop you there. So it almost sounds like President Trump was a figurehead for the American people and not really truly the commander in command as commander in chief.
Well, I'll answer that question this way. I think it's a very important question. He told me in words that President Trump is powerless. The president is powerless to the deep state. The administrative deep state runs America. And it's not just the career bureaucrats. It's people behind the scenes that operate America. And I'll give you an example. So, not to go too far off into the weeds so the public would understand, is that I was at war because I was pushing back hard against Fauci and Birx and the NIH and the CDC on issues around the masking for children, that it was toxic and dangerous, the school closures that President Trump was articulating opening schools when you are pushing schools to remain closed, which was adverse to his policies. Moreover, I had actually explained to Fauci and they that you people are flat wrong, because based on the science, and I was sharing with them, Hahn, Fauci, I was giving them the science and I was showing them that the science was showing us 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, in March, April, as soon as they began lockdowns, the science was showing us that the lockdowns didn't work and would never work and would harm the population. And I was articulating that. The science was showing us that the school closures would harm children. The science was showing us, bulletproof science, that the masks were ineffective, would be ineffective, and that there was no science to support these masks, the blue surgical mask. It was just nonsense. It was specious kind of nonsensical decision making. So I was hammering them on the inside, and they were coming at me hard. And there was a really interesting conversation that I had. It's like I had a conversation with Dr. Redfield once after a meeting, walking to the elevator, and I told him, I said, Dr. Redfield, I came here after you guys set up the task force on the lockdowns and the social distancing, can you provide me? So I was just blunt, because Redfield and me got along. I like Redfield. Personally, he's a God-fearing man. I thought his science was flat wrong. I thought he was weak in his ability to manage the CDC, and there was a constant coup to overthrow him. That's a separate discussion we could have. But I said, show me the science. Give me the science as a scientist of how you guys arrived at the social distancing rule. And he looked at me. I remember me got almost to the elevator, and he looked at me. He said, "Science, Paul," and he chuckled. And he said, well, we were getting along so well. We were like friends. He spent a lot of time in my boss's offices and stuff. So we were really casual at that point. He said, "Paul, there was no science." So I looked at him I said, "What do you mean there's no science?" He said, "Paul, we made it up." I said, "What do you mean made it up, Dr. Redfield?" Now, Dr. Redfield was the head of the CDC. He was a key integral part of the task force. He said, "We made it up. Some wanted 1 foot, some said 2, some said 9, some said 12. We went with 6.
Okay, so let me stop you there. So what I'm hearing is that the markers that we all saw at the grocery store that were spaced 6 feet apart
Pure
was
junk.
just a made-up number?
Just junk. It was not based on any science. It was just manufactured out of thin air. They probably brought something to appease or to be part of this pandemic response, which turned out to be an absolute failure. So he said it was made up. Now the thing is, when I brought that to the public, and I said at a certain point, I said, the 6 foot social distancing rule is just garbage, and we've ransacked society. We were getting data that business owners in America were hanging themselves. They committed suicide because they went from 10 tables in their little mom and pop, their nice restaurant, down to 4 with the 6 foot, and they couldn't survive. They couldn't pay their mortgage. They couldn't keep their staff. They had to close, and many of them they ended their lives, they self-harm. It was a disaster. So there I am, I'm stunned that wait, we brought a 6-foot social distancing rule that really was the cornerstone of the response. And you are telling me that it was made up. So much so that when I said it, people said, oh well, how come Redfield could have told you that? How come we don't know anything about it? Because you see, I was not this Ivy League educated scientist. You know, I came from my doctorate came from a university in Canada. These people didn't understand that in my training, the education that I got in my doctoral training, when you attended Harvard or Stanford or Yale or MIT or whatever in research methods, in research methodology, how to conduct primary comparative effectiveness research, you only go to those universities in research methods if you fail to get accepted to where I went to. The evidence-based medicine unit at McMaster University in Canada is the best in the world. Everybody understands who are researchers that if you want to learn purest, trustworthy, high quality evidence research methods, you have to try and get into McMaster unit. Not everyone. My skill is a very niche, specialized area. So the point I'm trying to make is that when they attacked me in the media for talking about the social distancing rule, turns out that Scott Gottlieb, who was a former FDA commissioner, he came out recently and he said, well, you know, this 6-foot social distancing rule was made up. So everyone said, what do you mean? Dr. Alexander was right. Turns out now that Fauci, in a hearing about 2 months ago, said in a congressional hearing that we had no science to support the 6-foot social distancing rule. So I was accurate in what I said. But look, forget about who said it, who didn't say it. The point is that the 6-foot social distancing rule was like the cornerstone of the pandemic response. Everything was embroidered around it. It is how we reshaped and reset society globally. It was all wrong. It was not true. It was garbage.
Okay, so what I find interesting is that throughout the pandemic, certainly the message was follow the science, and it almost became a tagline, right, of the COVID pandemic, follow the science. And what also happened was that anyone who dared to question the science was essentially smeared in the media and or canceled.
Like you.
Like me, yes. And I think that, you know, if it's always good, sure, to follow the science if there is, as you said, evidence and data to back up that science. But the fact, I'm really just amazed that that number was just chosen, 6 feet, because as you said, there are so many restaurants and stores that there was no possible way they could continue to keep their doors open with that type of distance required. Anything else that...
Well, I mean, look, it was emblematic of the entire COVID response. We know today, if we look at the body of evidence, and we look at all of the evidence on lockdowns, we look at all the evidence on school closures, we look at all of the evidence on business closures, we look at all of the evidence on masks and mask mandates, we could find not one location in this entire world. I'm not even talking about the 50 states in America. I am talking about every nation in this world that implemented lockdowns, closed schools, mandated masks. Not one where anybody could show any policy paper, any white paper, any comparative effectiveness research, any RCT or observational study that shows that they were effective. Nothing worked. That's what the public needs to understand too. Nothing worked in the pandemic response. It was all a failure. And I bring it back to myself and the question you asked about deep state. Somebody like myself and Dr. Atlas, on the inside, Dr. Navarro, we were fighting that deep state because you see, we weren't going along with even what the larger, even Trump administration were doing, because we were actually studying the science, and we were seeing that everything that they were doing was flat wrong, in the sense that had we done nothing other than strongly protected the vulnerable in society, that means our elderly, high-risk people, double down, triple down protections of them, make reasonable, common sense decisions, we'd have lost, basically, we'd have not lost the people that we did. In fact, maybe 98% of them that have died would be alive today. It is what we did in the medical response that was based on no science, just hearsay, and just a lot of power, a lot of control, a lot of money was made. It is what we did in response that killed the vast majority of people. And because I need to understand that, I need to bulletproof that answer to the question, because it's very important. I think it will set the stage for the kind of clarity and openness and transparency we're gonna have in our show going forward, especially when we have guests. Like we were supposed to have one guest today. We reorganized things so that we'd have that guest coming on in another show. Is this my fights internally with Fauci and Birx, and they were so major that they moved. It was told to me that the administrative state, headed by Fauci and CDC and NIH, were going to move to get me fired. So here I was in the administration, and it came across to me that we want you to tender your resignation or you'll be fired. And the day that was told to me, I was just out of an epic battle with Fauci. And so I said, well, but how could you do that, And they said, look, the decision is made. You tender your resignation, or we will fire you, and then we will put that on the White House website that you were terminated. Do you want us to put that? And now this is the director of the human resources, the human resources deep state, telling me this. And I'm in conversations with the senior leadership of the human resources for the entire US government. This is the meeting. With that person has the White House liaison. With that person has lawyers from justice, the legal counsel, the justice lawyers. So this is just me talking to all of these big people, and they're telling me you need to resign, or they're gonna fire you. Long and short of it, because I've written about this many times and I've spoken several, but in a Coles Note version, while I'm being told to bring my laptop, bring my cell phone, bring my badge to Health and Human Services, and bring a resignation letter by 4 p.m. on a particular day, I have the White House on the phone, in the other phone, my work phone. So I'm dealing with two phones. In short, we have people on this side telling me, the White House people, don't listen to what the human resources people are thinking. They can listen to the conversation. And I have the human resources people telling me, you need to terminate, you need to resign today. White House is telling me, put the phone down. They have no jurisdiction on you. You were first going to be a political appointee to Trump. Then you were made a federal employee through the Department of Defense. But the plan is to bring you into the White House now. In about 2 weeks. In about 2 weeks, you will be moved to the White House to advise the Oval Office directly as a scientific advisor. That's how it's explained to me. So I have them on the phone, I have these people at HR, and they're telling me don't listen to the White House. I'm listening to the government, the chief of staff and everyone. And they're telling me don't listen to the... So much so that the HR directorate told me point blank. They said, put the phone down in the Oval Office. The president has no power. Don't you understand that, Paul? President has no power over running the government. Zero. We are going to fire you by 4 p.m. today. You don't bring your resignation, we'll fire you. And that's what I did. I actually listen to them.
So let me just stop you, because earlier we had talked about the title of President of the United States, always referred to as Commander in Chief. So what I'm hearing right now is that not necessarily is that true in many respects.
Well, I think President Trump, when he got elected in 2016, from all I've seen and known and what I've experienced too, he did not understand the deep state. He heard of it, like many of us heard of it, until we lived in it and we worked in it, and it's real. And they hold the power. And I think when he spoke about draining the swamp, in some ways the swamp drained him to a certain extent. And I think he bumped up against the deep state and they made his life hell. Paul Ryan was a part of the deep state, the former speaker in Trump. He worked his first 2 years of the Trump presidency to destroy Trump's presidency. Imagine a Republican speaker working against a Republican president. And he did successfully damage President Trump. COVID, the fraud of COVID, the fraud pandemic, occupied the fourth year. President Trump really operated in his third year. And if you need to judge President Trump properly, you need to say, well, his achievements really occurred in his third year. Here was a president who really operated only in his third year without any major issues. Because remember, COVID destroyed the fourth year, and that was the election year. What Trump accomplished in year 3 was more than what Obama did in 8 years, and Obama did nothing. What Trump did in year 3 in America, because there are accomplishments that the media have never told the public. If you really read the list of Trump's accomplishments, you realize that except for Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, President Trump in January of 2020, pre-COVID, pre-lockdowns, was probably destined to be the greatest president of the United States, President Trump, because of what he did in year 3. I mean, he took the economy to the lowest unemployment, greatest labor participation rate. Everybody was working. He had China on his knees. He did all of the great things he did towards the state of Israel, etc. America was respected and feared. We were in no wars. Right now we have 4 wars under Biden and Harris. We have Ukraine, Russia. We have China might invade Taiwan. We have Iran lobbing missiles into Israel. And we have Israel Hamas. All of those under Biden. We didn't have that under Trump. So the truth of the matter is that we are living in a situation where President Trump, I think, didn't understand. And the point that I'm getting to you is this. President Trump 1.0 is not going to be President Trump 2.0. And I think that is the thing that his campaign has not sold well enough. And I will say it this way. From what I understand, from the conversations I am having with certain individuals deep inside the orbit, Trump 2.0 is coming for accountability. He's coming for justice. He's coming for righting a lot of the wrongs that took place in his first administration, and also a lot of the wrongs that was done to him in using the lawfare to try and destroy him. Because that's what we're facing. And what the public needs to understand is this. The attacks on President Trump is really an attack on me and you. The deep state, the rhinos, the Democrats, the cabal, the whatever, they are actually attacking bread and butter Americans, flyover country, blue-collared workers, average Americans who are working on the assembly line. The attacks on President Trump, the denial of his rights at these fake trials, the obliteration of him, the exposure, the smearing, the slandering, exactly what you experience and I experience as part of our pushback against the fraud pandemic response. But President Trump has experienced it in a different way, him and his family. My point is, I don't want this to come across as a Trump-centric discussion. I don't want this to come across, from my point of view, as I'm on the Trump train. I am on the Trump train. I am on any train. I've always said, I said it in my Substack that I write, my blog, I say it in any interview I go on to, that I am a nativist populist. I'm a sovereigntist, nation first. My nation first. I'll deal with every other nation and help you after I help my people first. The situation is this, that President Trump loves nation, border, anthem, constitution. He supports these things in whatever levels he does. So do I. You show me somebody, if you show me a liberal, if you show me a radical Democrat even, leftist, extreme left, you show me a libertarian, you show me any individual, even a conservative or a MAGA or whomever, just find that person and say, this person checks all the boxes that Trump checks, +1. I will vote for them. If you show me an extreme liberal, I will vote for them. It's not about conservatism or liberalism for me anymore. It's about saving America. It's about doing what is best for America. Because this fight that you and I are in and everybody else in America is going to outlive us. The fruits of this fight, the benefits of it, going to manifest in our children's adulthood, in their lifetimes. We will not see it or taste it. Sometimes we say hopefully before our eyes close we could see it or taste it, but likely no, because it took us a while to get here. Mm-hmm. It will take us a long time to fix it, but we need to start fixing. And my point is that we need to enter the battle. We need your listeners, the listeners here, to write, to agitate, to speak up, to interview, to join us in the battle. And we are just small people, but we have decided we have something to say.